Hello and welcome back to the Drop Step podcast. Guys, I'm excited. We are so close to All-Star Weekend. We're so close to sort of getting a little bit of a break from the night after night great basketball where you can sort of reset, gear up for that second half of the season. And I've got someone that I've wanted on the podcast for quite a while, big fan of his work. I have Steph Noh of Sporting News. And Steph, we are here today to talk about value. We are here today to talk about some of the worst contracts in the league, and we are going to talk about how teams approach them. But you recently wrote about this, published an article titled The 10 Worst Contracts in the NBA Right Now, ranking the 10 worst contracts in the NBA. Before we get into any of like the specifics, just tell us a little bit about like the thought behind the article and how you approached it, because I know it wasn't just sort of looking down the salary sheet and going like, oh, that guy looks overpaid, that guy looks overpaid. There's some numbers behind this, right?
Yeah, so I mean, excuse me, a trade season is upon us. And the way that super nerds look at trade season is probably different from the way casual fans do.
Mhm.
We look at it in terms of trading for contracts. And Bradley Beal has been in a lot of these rumors. It's been said that he is the worst contract in the league. I
Mhm.
kind of want a way to quantify that. I mean, for one, he's one of only two players with a no trade clause. LeBron is the other one. So that in and of itself just makes it a really bad deal. But even if he didn't have that, he would still be the worst contract just because like he's his production level, like he's scoring a lot of points, but it's just because he's taking a lot of shots. So his production level is something like, you know, uh third guard basically right now, which is not bad, but
Mhm.
I can't remember what it was, like top 5 in salary in the NBA, whatever. I think he's making like almost $50 million this year. Yeah, so the way that I came up with ranking these contracts is this is actually something from Seth Partnow's book, The Mid-Range Theory. Seth worked for the Bucks as an analytics guy for a long time. But the idea is that, there's these impact metrics. Maybe, you've heard of them like estimated plus minus EPM, Darko, Raptor before 538, 100. All of these things do kind of similar things, which is they try to estimate like how many points per 100 possessions a player is worth. And then you can translate that pretty simply actually into like how much a guy is worth in terms of like millions of dollars.
Mhm.
And you just look at that number, like what level of production they're giving you versus like what they're actually getting paid. And I found the difference in those numbers and I came up with a top 10 list. I thought like actually some of the names that did not make that list were almost as interesting as the ones that did. Like for instance, Zach LaVine, for a long time he was considered the worst contract in the league. He actually ended up 20th on my list. So still bad, certainly, but nowhere near probably what opinion was around him. It's kind of like changed now, but at the beginning of the season, certainly a lot of people felt that way about him.
I think something that I want to come back to a little bit later on in this episode is the idea of how quickly these contracts can change
Yeah,
from bad to
definitely.
good, how quickly the value can change. I think prior to the season, in order to get rid of Zach LaVine, it was speculated that the Bulls would have to attach at least a first round pick in order to move off of him. Now, in the space of about 50 games, we're talking about them receiving draft capital for LaVine. Obviously, had an absolute lights out season. I read today that he is one of 3 players in the league shooting 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and scoring over 24 points per game. The others are Kevin Durant and Karl-Anthony Towns, and they're both all-star starters. And those guys might bring different things to the table, but it sort of goes a long way to proving like if you have a bounce back season, if you can put a little run of form together, opinions can really change. It's that Daryl Morey thing of strong opinions weakly held.
Oh, I like that.
I really liked your article because it is based on the numbers. You haven't done a ranking where it's like, oh, I'm going to save the big juicy names for last, but it really ended up that way. Aside from Bradley
Yeah.
Beal, who we sort of expect to be always the top of the top on a list like this, it's great that he ended up being the worst value contract, and then just the cherry on top, you've got the no trade clause. It's adding proper insult to injury. But
Right.
names 2, 3, and 4 on your list. 3 and 4 on the same team, unfortunately. But Jaylen Brown coming in at number 2, and Joel Embiid and Paul George coming in at 3 and 4. I feel a little bit sorry for Joel. I feel a little bit sorry for Kawhi Leonard, who's number 5 on your list, because they are players that can absolutely bring it when they are fit, when they're healthy, when their knees not breaking down. But George and Brown just signed mammoth sort of contract extensions. Brown last year, George over the summer. And while it absolutely paid off for the Celtics, and Daryl Morey probably expected something similar this season, it doesn't look like it's going that way in Philadelphia. How do you feel about those guys? 2 wings, 2 really, really valued archetypes in the league, but it's not panning out thus far, both having down seasons.
Yeah, so just going back to something you said, I just want to make it clear, like these are not my personal feelings about if a contract is good or not, which I got a lot of feedback about that. Like, you're an idiot. Why do you hate Jaylen Brown? It's not me. It's just like the model that's spitting out these numbers. So the way that these models work is a lot of it. The reason why you get kind of different results based on different models, and this is also like how Vegas comes up with its lines for, over under win totals and stuff like that. It's a very, very similar methodology.
Yep.
But the big difference, the edge that you can get in your model is in minutes projections. That's like the easiest way to get a good model versus a mediocre model versus a bad model, is how accurate you are on these minutes projections. Now, for me, the way that I did it for the story was not very scientific. I just kind of guessed based on, if a guy's injury prone or not. So the 2 cases that you brought up are interesting because they're like very, very different the way that you get to the valuations. So for Jaylen Brown, I mean, he's been like somewhat healthy. The problem with him is like I don't know if people just like aren't looking at his numbers or not. But if you look at them, I mean, he is not nearly as good as he was last year. His shooting has really dropped down considerably. I think he's shooting like 32% from 3, which is obviously like not great. His efficiency, like true shooting numbers, is like when nerds look at it, whatever. Like just the points that he averages per shot is below league average. So he takes a lot of shots. He scores a lot of points. I think he's averaging like 23 points or something. But he's just not doing it. I mean, like you could spread those shots out to anyone else on the Celtics offense and they'd be better off essentially. And, for the people who are just like, blah, blah, blah numbers, like who cares? Like actually watch the games. I do watch a lot of Celtics games. And you can ask Celtics fans who watch a lot of the games, and they will all tell you that Jaylen has not been the same guy, especially on defense, because throughout the early portion of his career, he was considered a guy who was pretty talented, but just could not really put it together defensively. Last year was a big, big change for him. He was just way more locked in, and I thought he should have been an all defensive guy last year. And then this year, he's kind of back to his old bad habits. He's falling asleep, getting back cut a lot, just not connected. And, the Celtics have not been as good for that reason. So for him, when you get to his valuation, he's getting paid a crap ton of money. And like, he's just not really that great. The other guy you brought up, Paul George, he actually has been better in his minutes, but I just had like a fairly low minutes projection for him because he's already like hurt, and this contract's going to go for another 4 years. He's just going to get more and more injured as that contract goes on. So this is the same thing with like Kawhi and Joel Embiid. He's actually been one of the best players in the league as far as impact goes, but you just can't reasonably give him a big minutes projection. Like he's even said that he doesn't think he's playing back-to-backs ever again. And forget about back-to-backs. I mean, if he plays a quarter of his games, that's probably going to be considered a good year from him moving forward.
Yeah, I saw something the other day saying I think he's coming up to 900 games in his career and he's missed 400 of those.
Yeah.
So just about played like 52, 53% of his games and has earned an obscene amount of money, taking basically personal time off. Obviously, not just going on holiday. He's had terrible injuries. He's at times appeared cursed with sort of the nature of his injuries, like the Bell's palsy thing that happened a couple of playoffs ago. I'm surprised that he hasn't been hit by a truck yet. It just seems like he's one of the guys with the worst luck in the league. But
for sure,
coming back to a Jaylen Brown, all the percentages are down across the board. You referenced the 3-point percentage, shooting 32% this year. He was shooting 57% from 2-point range last year. That's dropped 5% down to 52%. And I can't think of a player in more recent memory that is probably having more sort of like a champagne breakfast season. To get paid that massive contract, to win an NBA championship, have those two things compile, makes it really, really hard to bake into your evaluation. Is he just coasting because he knows he's on a loaded team? He knows that the Celtics are going to have a good playoff seeding, can get to the playoffs and can suddenly turn it back up again? Or is there some regression for a guy that sort of came into the league as an uber athlete, has put a fair few miles on the clock? It's his age 28 season here. And that's another thing with the modeling that must be quite hard to project. I suppose you can sort of look at trends from the past, sort of different comparisons, different archetypes, but guys are aging very differently now to how they aged even 10, 15 years ago. So it is a real reason why Vegas is this sort of all-seeing overlord that invests all the time into it, and they tend to be right more than just about any other analyst, right?
For sure, yeah. I mean, a more sophisticated model too. We have actually pretty good aging curves. We know like how different positions age. Mine, I did not make it that sophisticated, but certainly like Vegas does that. Jalen, he's, as you said, 28 or whatever, so he should be fine going forward. I mean, I don't really know if I don't really know what the issue is, why he's dropped off. And to be clear, I don't think he's like a terrible player or anything. The impact models have him, I believe, somewhere in like the 70s range, so the 70th best player in the league, which is good.
Yep.
But he's paid like a top 5 guy. That's really the issue there. I don't think there's any, even like the biggest Jaylen Brown fan would not tell you that he's a top 5 player in the league.
And it's this issue that these teams get into when they have had great success. And another player that's on your list is Jamal Murray. And I sort of messaged you prior to recording and said, I want to talk about Jamal. I want to talk about Jalen in conjunction with each other, because I think the more interesting part of this conversation is the attitude to signing these contracts and then trading for them across the league. Because if you had told anyone, what was it, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, oh, you shouldn't sign Jaylen Brown to that extension just after they sort of like, I suppose it was just after the 22 season. Was it the one where they just got knocked out by the Heat?
I don't remember, to tell you the truth.
Oh, don't worry. We'll edit this out. We'll look really professional. It was either the 22.
You don't have to edit it out. That's fine. One of the things I admire in analysts is when they say that they don't know the answer to something, because that means that you can trust what they do say. So actually, please do not edit that out.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go. We're being true to form. We're being absolutely
I will tell you happily when I do not know something.
I suppose Murray is the one where you really look and you say, this is a guy that put up a ludicrous stat line through the playoff championship run, where he absolutely looked like, I suppose, like a top 25, top 20 player in the league, was putting up insane efficiency, near triple doubles in the finals as well. And just absolutely formed a 2-part tandem with Nikola Jokic, as opposed to just being carried by the big Serbian, who, if you are watching on video, you can see a lovely little poster in the background of Steph's camera shot. Yeah, go check it out. Links below, etc. We were speaking about the poster just before we started recording. Murray's another example of just a guy where it's so hard to predict what the production is going to continue to be. He's someone that struggled with injuries throughout his career, seems to be able to really put it together when it matters. But has that been luck? Has that just been, is that the kind of personality he is? Steph, I think the most interesting question here is, these are two teams in Denver and Boston who have a team that works, have a team that wins, have a team that gives them a chance at winning a championship. Do you ever look at these bloated contracts and think, the model's telling me, Jaylen Brown, for example, is going to underperform his value by $107.1 million over the course of his 5-year contract? Do you ever look and think, can we split these guys into two? Can we trade them for role players? As the league has got more talented, is there more value in deepening your core? Or do you think it's worth overpaying for stars when there's been proof in the pudding, when it's clear that the model has worked sort of in the past?
Well, they're two kind of different situations, and it's interesting, to go into those differences. So with Boston, they already have a great team. I don't think they need to make upgrades as long as they can keep their team together, which they can. It's going to be super expensive. So it's irrelevant if Jaylen Brown is overpaid, if Tatum, any of these guys are overpaid. the way that the NBA salary rules work is all that means is the owners have to pay way, way more in luxury. And if they can't afford it, like boo-hoo, these guys are billionaires.
Yeah, of
And
course.
they can always sell the team, which is actually what the Celtics are doing. And I really admire the fact that their owner is just saying, like, listen, I got you guys a championship. I'm not going to spend $250 million in tax payments. I'm just going to like cash out and be a part-time owner. I think like way more teams should do that. So for the Celtics, like it doesn't matter. It really does not matter. They're going to be able to keep their team together for at least 3 more years. The Nuggets are a different situation because they're not as good as the Celtics. They need. So when you need to bring outside talent in, that's when bad contracts really hamstring you. The Nuggets basically have very, very few avenues. They can't use free agency to add talent. They just don't have the space. Their trade situation is very restricted. They can't add any more salary than they're sending out. So, I mean, basically they're limited to trading like Michael Porter Jr. in order to get an upgrade. Nobody's going to trade for that Murray contract because, everybody still thinks that, first of all, it's not allowed. You have to wait a year before or 6 months before signing these extensions, after signing these extensions, I should say. Um, yeah, but even if he were trade eligible, nobody would. And the Nuggets assets to send out as far as draft picks go. Like you need to really track every single dollar. Like they have a bad contract that's very small. He's making $8 million a year. This guy's just not. Not Najee. I mean, on a normal team, that wouldn't be a big deal. On the Nuggets, that could cost that ability to gain one extra rotation player. So yeah, that's I guess that's kind of the differences between those two situations.
And ironically, I wonder if they looked at the Zeke Naji signing as, hey, at least we can tie this guy down to, fungible money, essentially. In this era, I think it was signed prior to the announcement of what the second apron restrictions would be. We have our core. If we want to be able to trade for another contributing player in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, we have this guy who maybe he pans out for us. Maybe he can be our backup big. But I think it was much easier to shed $8 million a couple of years ago when teams didn't seem quite so salary conscious as they are now. And it's really, really sort of backfired in quite a big way for the Denver Nuggets. But what I want to talk about, you said you have to be so careful about signing these bad contracts. I almost wondered when you were talking about the Nuggets there and how they add talent is, do they have to take a few more risks than your average team would in the league? I advocated for the summer. I am a massive, massive Zach LaVine fan. Did
Oh,
a little
nice.
video about him on the YouTube channel. Went on a couple of podcasts, and I threw it out there. Denver should be going for Zach LaVine. We're not sure what Jamal Murray is going to be. We take this bet where you don't have to pay anything and you have a higher upside with a guy like Zach, with a guy that can sort of play this almost hybrid Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon role. Your cutter off the ball, your 3-point shooting threat on the ball, can create for himself, can carry a bench unit. And on a couple of podcasts, it was sort of quite well received. Like, I like the way you're thinking. And on another couple of them, it was like, what the hell are you talking about? Zach LaVine is one of the worst contracts in the league. Why the hell would Denver do that a year removed from
keep
signing?
receipts? You gotta tell those guys.
100%. But if that trade had been announced in the summer, I'm pretty sure your average analyst might have looked and gone, what the hell are Denver doing? What are they smoking up there? Now it's legal in Colorado. But if they had done it now and we're looking back and he has the season that he's had, you think it's the steal of the century. So, Steph, we're sort of talking about how careful you have to be with these bad contracts. I think because I have no skin in the game, there's no stakes for me. I really look at the NBA and I kind of wish that teams would take these chances more, because I do think that the relative value of a player can change very, very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, definitely. I think if you're a top 10 player in the league, you're going to be good no matter where you go. But for the rest of the guys, fit is just so important in how good of a player you are. I mean, look at who they got rid of in KCP, right?
Yeah.
Like we all thought that would be a killer for them. Christian Brown has stepped in and been pretty good in that same role, and KCP has been really bad in Orlando. And that's just, playing with Nikola Jokic. You look at Westbrook too on that team. Westbrook has had a career revival. He looked like he was 1 foot out the door, being terrible in the playoffs for the Clippers. And he goes to Denver. We all think that it's a bad move. And now, Michael Malone just said that the 2-man game between Westbrook and Jokic is the best weapon in the league. I mean, better than Jamal Murray. He didn't say that, but it's insinuated by not
Yeah.
including Murray in that comment. And he's right. Like, Westbrook and Jokic have been unbelievable. So yeah, that's just a testament to how much these valuations can change. And that's a weak point in these models too, is they can't really incorporate fit. They just base it on, the players that are currently on your team.
Yeah, I went back and I looked at an article from Spotrac. I looked at an article from Hoops Hype, and they were both published. One was sort of at the start of 2024, I think around February. The other was published 1st of April. That was the Hoops Hype one. And I took down some names that were on these similar lists, these 10 worst contracts.
Love it. Writing down names of these people that wronged these players.
Just to say, absolutely love Keith Smith. Keith has come on the podcast. I think he's incredible at what he does.
He's a good guy,
amazing. Yeah, amazing that he's in the media space. That he's
but he's also an idiot, according to you. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, absolutely. I'll clip it. Don't worry. This is going to go, crazy on social media. But on this list, he was predicting the 10 worst contracts.
Okay,
and he had Zach LaVine at number 3, Jordan Poole, somewhere on this list, Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins, Nikola Vucevic, and Damian Lillard. And
again, so many of those guys are positive value now.
Exactly. And I trust Keith's evaluation. If he were to come on the podcast, just wanted to talk about, who's going to be a real threat in the playoffs, who aren't we looking at?
Yeah. No, Keith was right at the time. Like you said, it's just, that's a good illustration of your point that so much can change.
Yeah. And it makes me think. So you had a couple more players on that list that we haven't come to. Players, both, when you look at this list, these players tend to be in winning situations. These players tend to be on teams that are all in, so to speak, and they're sort of forced into signing these extensions because it's, can we keep the core together? We're championship or bust. And then 2 Portland Trailblazers stand out, and it's like, what the hell are these guys doing there? They're a rebuilding team. They should have kept, salary space. Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton both figured on your lists. And it's not in the spirit of my first point, because on the one hand, I'm advocating for you should absolutely trade for these bad contracts. You should take these risks. If you can get picks back for a guy, if you can sort of rent out your space, absolutely, teams should be far more open to doing these things. And then I look at Portland and I'm like, what the hell were they thinking? Because Ayton was acquired during that Damian Lillard trade. He was acquired with multiple years left on his deal. And Jeremy Grant was signed. I'm sure Portland must have had some sort of indication. Maybe it was a little bit more sort of split at the time, but it was just prior to Damian Lillard's trade request. 5 years, $160 million. How do you look at those guys? And how do you look at rebuilding teams, taking chances on players that maybe haven't worked in one situation, but they'll take them back in a trade return instead of draft capital, instead of young guys?
Yeah, I mean, second draft guys can certainly have a ton of value, but they come with a ton of risk, and I think that motor is something that's really hard to change throughout your career. Aiden, he had these problems in Phoenix, so you kind of knew that it was a red flag. Also in college at Arizona. And yeah, I mean, like, I kind of think he is who he is right now. Like, you can always hope that a guy just flips a switch. I mean, that kind of did happen with Andrew Wiggins for a year when, he had his all-star season and the Warriors won the championship. And he has been better this year too. Like you mentioned, he was a negative value contract last year, picked it up this year, but it's just so rare that that happens. And as far as Jeremy Grant, he's like kind of strange. Like this year, he has completely forgotten how to score inside the 3-point line. He's just shooting really, really bad at the rim, which is weird because he's such a good athlete. And his shot selection is not great. He's still a good 3-point shooter though, good defender, but he just makes so much money. It's hard to get to his number. I think he makes high 20s, something 20, 29, something like that.
And it's quite funny because when fans will then go and see these lists, they will take a different meaning. They won't take it's like, oh, Jeremy Grant is probably worth $18 million a year right now. They'll go,
Yeah.
oh, Jeremy Grant is one of the worst players in the league. It's like the Tobias Harris effect, where
Yeah.
the poor guy, the incredibly rich guy, was paid nigh on max salary for a few years in Philadelphia, but also built up this reputation as, one of the jokes of the league. He was a punchline on Twitter, and it's the price you pay when you're getting paid that sort of premium salary.
I guess. I don't know. I've never a big fan of that, but yeah. I suppose I did it in the story, but yeah. I
No,
don't
no, I'm not saying that it should happen. I'm just saying that it absolutely does. It's
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd never, as like a fake player's agent, say, hey, maybe you should take less money because you're really going to get a bad rap on Twitter if you sign this big contract and you don't turn out to be like the next Michael Jordan. But it does just seem to be what happens. People can't dissociate the value from the on-court value.
For sure.
What's our opinion then on these bad contracts? Because it doesn't seem like this is an issue that's going to go away. It might be something that shapes free agency. It might be something that shapes future extensions. I think guys that sign in their rookie extensions tend to have a little bit more leeway, but these third contract guys, how do you think it's going to affect the league going forward? Do you think we're about to see teams become more conservative, maybe make these Paul George style moves where the Clippers sort of say, no, we're all right, we don't want to re-sign you, we're going to go for depth? Or do you think it's a little bit of a flash in the pan and maybe normality will resume in the next couple of years when teams sort of figure out a couple of ways around these second apron stipulations and they think like, we can figure this out, we can keep our teams together?
Well, I do think that the gridlock what the new CBA has created is going to get less severe in the next couple of years. I mean, it just I think it caught a lot of teams by surprise how
Yeah.
punitive this stuff is going to be, and they will adjust. But I think that one way of looking at all of this stuff that fans don't really do, and general managers certainly do a
Mm-hmm.
lot, is fans just look at the average annual value that a guy's making. They say, "Oh, Paul George is making $50 million a year. That's too much money." But what general managers really care about is the years, because
Yeah.
if you get stuck with a bad deal for 4 years, that's a big problem. If you get stuck with a bad deal for 1 year, I mean, it's almost impossible to be that big of a deal. Like, you're
Mm-hmm.
just fine. You can get rid of it. It can turn into an asset, expiring money. It can turn into an asset at the trade deadline to get out of another one of these bad deals. So when you see your favorite team sign a guy and it's for a lot of money, but it's only a 2 or 3 year contract and the team has an option on it, that's a great deal for you. That's a great deal for your team. That's
Yeah.
the player's agent, like, not winning the negotiation. When you see a contract getting signed, Patrick Williams gets signed 18 million a year for 4 years with a player option on the fifth year. That is a terrible deal for the team. And that is like super, super player friendly. So you should really care more. Fans should care more. I mean, they should really not care about any of this stuff because it's just like minutiae. But if they do want to put on their general manager hats, they should care more about the options that are at the end of the year and how many years the contract runs, because those are the things that just totally kill you in team building.
Yeah, don't worry about Isaiah Hartenstein. Don't worry about Fred VanVleet. Don't worry about Bruce Brown. We know
Yeah.
the numbers. That just forget about them unless your team, missed out on some massive opportunity in free agency, or unless your team has severely miscalculated what could happen next summer. It really doesn't matter a ton because, like you said, these contracts can be fungible. These contracts will, for better or for worse, they will drop off the books sooner rather than later. Steph, I think I just want to finish on a question where
Sure.
it's, are there any players around the league that you look at and you say, if I were a general manager, I might be taking a chance on a guy with a contract like this? Or are there any players around the league that you expect maybe will join this list? I'm sorry, this is a complete putting you on the spot. It's a gut feeling question. Are there any players that when you come to write this list in 12 months time rather, you're a little bit worried that they're going to appear out of nowhere?
Who would I take a chance on? Nick Claxton is a hugely so he was the number 13 player on my list. He I don't know what happened to him. Like he was a defensive player of the year type of candidate, and he's just been terrible on the Nets the last couple years. And he's still young. He's still got the same like athleticism. So I think it would take basically nothing to trade for him. The Nets would I don't know. I mean, maybe they're still high on him, but based on his production, certainly like you could probably get him for pretty cheap. Another guy, I think that Emmanuel Quickly is a really interesting case
Yeah.
because when he was signed, people thought that it was a great deal and that he could be the next Jalen Brunson. I thought the second he signed it, it was going to be a terrible deal. And right now, I have it as the number 26 deal in the league. And that's, as I said, like the way that you come up with these valuations is largely dependent on a minutes projection. So I gave him like a normal minutes projection. Like he's just going to be a normal starter, but he's been hurt almost all of this year. I mean, who knows if like he's actually healthy? And even if he is, like, I just think that I hate like doing this because I don't like bringing players down. I usually like hyping them up, but I think he's like a good point guard who's probably point guard is such a competitive position. He's probably like the 22nd best starter in the league or something. And he's getting paid like a top 12 or 13 starter. So that's just that's another situation where his deal is long term. So that, minus 15 million a year, it just adds up really, really quickly and it just kills you. Yeah.
At least with Quickly, I think it's 5 years flat. So I think he signed to $32.5 million every single year of the 5-year deal. So I'm not going to be the super nerd. I'm not smart enough to sort of say like, oh, if you factor in minus 8% and sort of look at what his starting salary would have been this year, if you'd just done those classic 8% raises, maybe it looks a little bit better. I think Toronto maybe looked at it and said, we'd rather pay you up front and bet that you're going to give us sort of plus value on the end of this deal. But I'm with you. I was a little bit worried. I love Raptors Republic. I love Samson Falk. And I remember he wrote an article.
He's the man. Look, I got the beanie for Samson here.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely representing the Great North. But he wrote an article just prior to the Quickly extension where he predicted the amount of money that he was going to get. And I think he anchored it to sort of Tyler Hero's contract, who's another player that we could have spoken about as a clear example of like, wow, opinions change pretty fast on these guys. And I think he said,
it's been awesome.
110 to $120 million over the course of 4 or 5 years. I can't remember what the years split was, but when it dropped, it was going to be 165 over the course of 5. I remember just thinking, I'm not going to drop him a DM because, fundamentally positive about covering the team. I know that he's got, high hopes for Quickly. There are some question marks around his game, but I didn't want to sort of slide in and say, hey, are you worried about this? We're announcing this, but are you worried about what's just happened? And I really wonder what his trade value is, because there are teams around the league that, despite, like you said, he might be the 22nd, 23rd best starting point guard in the league. There are teams with a need at that position.
Yeah. I mean, the Magic would love a player like that, They don't have a guy like that.
I'm pretty sure I remember the Spurs being linked to both him and Nemhard prior to the extension, prior to, I suppose it would have been while he was still in a Raptors uniform, but there was talk like, oh, maybe they could target this guy in free agency. Sure. We'll see if Quickly is one of these like sink or swim players in the next couple of years. But just to say, he had a really, really rough environment last year, having come from like decent-ish spacing in New York with a couple of offensive threats around him, playing against second units. I did a live stream game with Samson where I watched an overtime game against the Portland Trail Blazers where he was the only guy playing that night that could create for Toronto. And he's had to get a lot of resilient buckets. I think Scotty Barnes was out injured. RJ Barrett was out injured. So he's had to inningsy, if we're going to borrow from a different sport, hopefully in a slightly like warmer context.
Cricket, right?
Yeah, in it. I was thinking baseball. I was hoping baseball. Yeah. Don't scare me like that. Don't scare me like that. But maybe this number will look a little bit less high in a slightly better context. And there are
I'll
rumors.
give you one positive because I don't want to be negative.
Yeah, go for it.
So Patrick Williams, he is the 5th worst contract, and I just said with Aiden that guys with poor motor, that doesn't really change most of the time. Patrick Williams is like the worst motor in the league. I mean, he has so much talent, but he just like it's definitely a mental thing with him. The Bulls just moved him to the bench, and he's been a lot better in that lower pressure role. So I think he's like a really good case for a team to take a flyer on because he would cost nothing. I mean, I saw Sam Vecini do like trades that he wants to see, and his trade was Nurkic for Pat Will straight up. Nurkic is racking up DNPs. He's so bad, and he's got another year left at 19 million. So I mean, you're trading like Nurkic is like a terrible contract too. He was 25th worst on my list. The only reason his isn't that bad is because it's only 2 years. Yeah, so like a trade like that, if the Suns wanted to do it, I think that would be great because I do think that like it's basically impossible for him to get worse. And he's still pretty young. He could improve. I don't think he's ever going to be worth his money, but he won't be as bad.
Matt Ishbia also seems like the ultimate owner to go, oh, it goes 5 years. Who cares? I'll take the flyer on it.
Yeah.
You know,
And he could do that too. I mean, like I said, it's only an impediment when you're trying to bring in new players. If you just want to keep your guys, it's just going to cost the owner a lot of money. And who cares if you're a fan, right? Like you don't care if a billionaire is losing another 100 million.
Absolutely. And with what they've done with their 2031 first round pick, sort of horcruxing it, I think I saw Nate Duncan call it. They can get around the second apron thing where you have your pick 7 years out frozen. If they were to move that at the deadline, they might actually be okay.
Yeah, they wouldn't even need to do it for this trade, but yeah.
Yes.
More generally, you're correct.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, they've got plenty of shenanigans that they can sort of still get up to, despite the fact that they're a very limited asset team. It's going to be fun to see. It's almost like a NBA 2K style. Can you rebuild with this set of factors? But we'll see what happens in Phoenix. Steph, before we get out of here, anything to plug? Any final thoughts aside from Patrick Williams cannot get any worse? Maybe there's some upside there.
I just want to plug the Drop Step podcast with Jack Quantrill. Did I pronounce your last name right?
Absolutely, close enough. 100%.
Wonderful host. He won't correct you when you make mistakes on things like what year things happened or how to pronounce his last name. True gentleman and a scholar. I highly recommend you all give it a 5-star review and subscribe.
Oh my God, you're doing my job for me. Thank you so much, Steph. I'll be pestering you in the coming months, see if you are more than willing to come back on. But yeah, guys, go and check out Steph's work. He writes great stuff for Sporting News. I really enjoy reading his work. He's an essential follow on Twitter or Blue Sky. All of his links will be down below. Let us know what you think of bad contracts. If you're watching this on YouTube, would you be a GM that takes risks? Would you stay the hell away from them? And keep it locked on the Drop Step. Lots more fun episodes on the way shortly. Thank you for listening. Cheers.